but by 11:15, we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you here, you can hear and see me okay? Great. Great. Well, it's finally sunny here in Maine. It took a long time for spring to find us on the coast, but it's finally here. So I'm happy it's a bit sunny. And great. I have a couple screens here, so I'll be able to look at the chat through this conversation today. So feel free to chat in there. I'll make sure to always check it. And where is everyone else coming in from today? If you want to pop it in the chat, I'd love to see mostly Ohio folk. Columbus, nice. Cool, cool. Makes sense, makes sense.
Columbus, Deba is Columbus.
Nice. I'm originally from Toronto, so I know Ohio really well. It's kind of like a neighbor. All right, well, it's 11:15, and I think we'll go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover today. And if you're wondering and making sure you're in the right place, this is Essential Application Tools for Artist Grants. And today we're going to kind of cover two sections. Mainly, the first part will be how to kind of get around writing an artist statement. And then the second half I like to save for tips for success, which includes more details on budget questions you might get and some organization points that have really helped me. So welcome everyone, and just some housekeeping. If you feel like you have a noisy background, throw yourself on mute. That would be really helpful. And you can, yes, like I said earlier, please use the chat. I'll make sure to check it as much as I can. If there are any questions throughout this first hour, I can get to them as I find a spot. But I've also saved some time at the end to go over any questions. So great, let's get started then. So who am I? Hi, everyone. My name is Coco McCracken. I'm a photographer, writer, editor, copywriter. Sometimes you fall into a lot of buckets when you're in this world. But my background mainly comes from art in a film and literature aspect. And then I've been working in marketing and media for a long time, a couple decades really. And I feel like most recently, especially since moving to Maine about 6 years ago, I've really pursued the or actually I discovered that there's money out there that the government has for artists. So I've been really hunting that down the last few years, and I've had a lot of success. These are just a few residencies and grants that I've had lately, and I've really had the pleasure of working for a lot of art nonprofits here in Maine. So I do a lot of judging, and I read a ton of artist statements and grants yearly on various boards. So hopefully that my blend of artist and judge can help inform today's talk. All right, so this is, like I said, we're going to go into two different categories. So the first, we're going to cover the artist statement, kind of figure out why are we creating this? And I always find it's helpful to know where you're writing from. Basically figuring out what discipline you're in, but also what part of the process, I'm curious, everybody's in. Do you have a grant or a proposal that you're currently working on and you have a deadline, or do you have a little more time to get organized with your thoughts and really think it through? And yeah, there we go. We got someone just joining. Welcome, welcome. And then we're going to start just diving into specific examples and some real feedback that I've given. And then you'll get to read my very messy old artist statement and then my new one. So just kind of seeing the difference of how I edit my own and some feedback I give on others. In the tips section, the second half, we're going to go through some really great organizational tips that I've learned, which really, I feel like as an artist, I have the hardest time wrapping my head around. But with a few tricks in Excel and Google Drive, it's changed everything and led me to win a lot more grants and awards. I saved a couple slides for example budgets because that also can be really complicated and it doesn't have to be. And then at the very end, I have a bunch of links to resources and questions that we'll go through together. And all of these slides are going to be given to you after. So if you feel like I'm moving too fast or you've missed anything, all of these will be given to you, including, I believe, a recording of this webinar. All right. And someone just submitted their first grant to the GCAC yesterday. That's huge. I mean, the first part of this whole thing is doing this work. So congratulations, Leslie. We're going to be thinking of you while we go through this. So yay. Okay, let's get started. So the artist statement. Why? I think that the first 10 artist statements I wrote, I didn't even think about this. I knew what kind of work that I did, coming from someone who wrote a lot about being an Asian woman, living in Maine, for example, but I didn't really write it down. So I find that even just starting with this artist statement and pretending that even no one's reading it is a really good way for you to re-examine your art. And, whether that's sculpture or literary arts or film, just kind of coming back to like, okay, what am I trying to say? And how am I going to communicate this? And it always leads me to hone things in my actual art too. Oh, I loved that I thought about this in the statement. I'm going to actually apply this to my next piece. I think a really important thing to remember too is that the people who are reading these statements need to know you, especially being a judge, you're going to get a slew of documents. So this little piece of writing is going to be the first introduction that they have to you. So you need a little bit of context and connection. And documentation, as we talk about later about organization and figuring out a system to organize all of your applications, it can be really great to look back on your past statements and how they've evolved. I always like to see how that informs my future writings. And then finally, you just need one. I wish I had something more fun to say there. They're almost in every grant application. So there it is. All right, so where are you writing from? I admit, and I'd like to be more like number 2 here, but I'm more like number 1. There's a grant you found and you have to apply and the deadline is in 1 month. So you have to get it done. And this can be helpful. I think it's really important to know how you work. If you need a deadline to get things done, this can be great. However, a rushed jobs might mean you could miss some elements. Maybe you're not letting some friends edit it, or maybe you haven't slept on it enough and it can feel rushed. As opposed to, and when you have more spare time, and hopefully just after chatting today, even if you do have a deadline coming up, there could be something in the future you're thinking of. So it's nice to always think about future opportunities. So you have time to think about through, that's a big pro. And I think not hiring an editor always, but even just asking a friend or a family member to read through it, see if it's clear, it can be massively helpful. And usually if you're asking for a favor, you don't want to say, this is due tomorrow, can you read this? You want to give them time too. Cons, you don't want to overthink it. This actually I'll talk a little bit more about in a slide when I show you my example of my old artist statement. I definitely overthought it. So I think it's really nice to be able to keep things really edited and trim. So these are just kind of nice things to figure out. Okay, these are like the basics. Where are you starting from? When you go to sit down at your table and go through your work or your portfolio and you start writing, what are the parameters? Where are you going from there? And the big why is because different grants ask for different items to go with your proposal. So for example, there are some grants that just want an artist statement and your sample and your body of work. I usually apply for BIPOC related grants, and a lot of those ask for specific cover letters that talk about my community work here in Portland, Maine. So that matters because I might not want to add too much of that in my artist statement to take up valuable word count. I might want to keep that in that separate letter. However, if it's just, I just wrote in the second paragraph, Maine Arts Commission just wanted my artist statement, my budget, And I mean, they didn't need a lot. So I went back to my artist statement and I made sure that that community work for my BIPOC peeps was in there. Um, so my suggestion is this: if you have the time to think ahead, you have an anchor artist statement. Maybe it's a bit longer and you always pull from and kind of work with that as your core. And then you don't delete that. You have a separate document that you move to that can be, okay, this one is for Greater Columbus Arts Council, and I sent it on this day. Then you have another grant, you go back to your anchor statement, and then you write it for that one. So I should have made a graphic of this. Instead of editing the one that you apply for each, institution, you always come back to your core so you don't miss, you know, where your art is really coming from. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions about that analogy, let me know. But basically, having one core statement that lives somewhere on your desktop or your cloud drive that you can always refer to has been very helpful in keeping me stay on track when I'm writing these. And I think a helpful thing is just to know what the differences are. So the artist statement, what we're talking about today, these are more idea-based, thematic, maybe the motivations behind your work. They're almost always written in first person, a little more reflective. You're considering things. There can be questions in them. I put 100 to 300 words. I think 100 is very admirable, but I think I meant to write 200. Anyways, mine is about 400 words. It really can vary. I've never had a situation where they had a cap. But I will say, you don't really want to go over 5, 6, 1,000 words is just getting a little too long. And that isn't really about anything in particular, but for the fact that you want to hook the judge or panel judge. And you want this to stay consistent across applications. You can, like I said, tailor the core minorly, but the statement of purpose and cover letter will always be a little different. And your CV would be different if you have new things to add that are timely. Any questions about the difference between an artist statement, a CV, or a cover letter? All right. So you need to write the statement. One thing that this is, again, there is no one way to do this. These are things that have really helped me, especially as a writer. I am not great at writing perfect sentences and then editing it and then moving on to the next line. I like to work a little more like write it all out, get out all the ideas. Maybe it is 1,000 words. Then I edit it and then I come back and I wrote here on the slide, put it away, write it again, try to write it from memory. I think the idea here, kind of like the very first thing I was talking about, is it really reconnects you to the art that you're making. Even if the versions are slightly different, you'll notice that there are some core themes that keep coming up. Or even more important, if you're looking at your body of work again, and then looking at your artist statement, and there's a disconnect, then you want to rectify that. So let's say, for example, I write a lot about being half Asian in a very white state, but I also always talk about punk music or pop culture. Music is a very big theme in my work. Now, if that's not in my artist statement, I might be missing out on something that sets me apart from other applicants that could be very interesting to a judge. So cross-referencing your work again and your artist statement is nice to make sure that things are aligned, because you don't want people to be too surprised after they read your artist statement to find something in your body of work that's totally different or not what they expected. First person went over that. And then staying focused in your artist statement has been a really big thing that I've noticed. So you want to make sure that you can describe this work very succinctly. And there's the idea of, there's the elevator pitch. You can kind of practice that. You can try just talking about it verbally with friends and family. You can record yourself if you're a little more shy, on your phone and then see yourself speaking back about your work. I find that that's been really helpful for me as well. And then above all, keep it simple. I think that it can be exciting and very intriguing to get really into the depths or these very particular things you're trying to explore. But I think it's really important to remember that some people who are reading these applications might not be professors at art institutions. They might be like me, who is, I don't know, I read trashy romance novels and I don't know all the conceptual ideas behind a certain artist. So save this for material maybe deeper in your work and keep the jargon out of the artist statement. All right, here's some sample feedback. I can't give the exact statement that was sent in for privacy, but this is some feedback that I gave recently. And just to let you know, the artist statement started with just a list of their accomplishments. So I bolded some really important things here. It could use a little more honing. This is more of like a springboard of what the mission might be, but they never really dove into the actual mission of their work. I think almost towards the end of this particular artist statement, they said, my artistic practice, dot, 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 and then told me something incredible. So I said, oh, let's bring that to the very top. I want to know right off the bat, what is your practice? You can include your medium, the location if it's important. And basically, the anecdote, again, could fit in maybe later in a cover letter. This artist statement is so precious of word count. You want to keep those maybe for later. And especially anytime there's like a list of accomplishments, you have a CV. So let the judge do the work to read it there. And if for any reason there is no need for a CV, which there are some applications that I've done that didn't require one, and you want to list all of your accolades, I still wouldn't put it in the artist statement. Perhaps maybe a link to your website or an additional PDF. I think just making sure that the artist statement is free of the list of accomplishments is really helpful. Here's another example of some feedback. This is more about broad abstract language being used. So I think in this particular one, I had to Google almost 10 of the words that were in it. And even though I like trashy romance novels, I did go to art school and I still had to Google a lot of these ideas. So make sure you stay away from that. The only time I would say is to not be shy about using specific language is if, I mean, you also want your artist statement to stand out. So it's okay to bring in language that feels a little bit different or unique, but don't make it too highfalutin to be too out of grasp for people to understand. And this particular one too, there weren't any concrete examples or specifics. I didn't even actually think they didn't put the medium, and I had to go into their other portfolio to figure out that they were working with printmaking. And so I wanted to know more about the materials and what made that practice unique. So there's a little bit of the basics going back to the who, what, when, where of the practice, which is really nice. You want to color the whole senses for the person. And interestingly enough, I just want to pause for a second because the latest issue of Poets and Writers magazine, they're a writing magazine. They just had a little very short article on drafting an artist statement. That's hilariously enough. So I will put the link to this in later. But even if you're not a writer, I found the advice very helpful. And a lot of it is some things that I'm touching on today. But I think they said at one point, where's the example? Her name is Shelley Wong, is the, here, I'm going to put it in the chat too, so you guys can keep, it's Poets and Writers. And Shelley Wong was the writer of this. And again, I can send this to you after. But having this artist statement is like an introduction to yourself. So again, bringing in the five senses is really nice because this world is very digital. And so we have to do it through paper and applications online. All right, let's see, let's go. All right. I am so sorry. You don't have to read all of this. This was my first statement that I wrote in 2021 or 2022. Maybe you can tell I was in the throes of the pandemic with my newborn at home, and I was just all over the place. So this is something that I actually did use and applied to some grants. And I don't know if this is worthwhile. I actually did get a grant using this, but they had feedback for me and they said, we're going to give you this grant, but in the future, A, B, C, D about trimming it, honing it, staying focused in your statement would be really helpful, which I found so lovely that they did that. So remember too, at the other end of where your paperwork is going, there are human people there. I always like to remind myself that. So I don't know how interactive you want this webinar to be, but if anyone has any ideas of what makes this not so great of a statement, you can throw it in the chat. I'm just going to refresh my memory on some things that I wrote here. I mean, if it's long, it's definitely a bit long, and there's a lot of repetition in here. I think that talking about identity is something that many people write about or create work about, especially now. And I'm talking about identity, diversity, but I'm just repeating the same words over and over again. It wasn't very specific. Um, and I could probably cut this in half, which is what I did, and it would still create the same impact. Oh, and I ended with a quote, which I thought was very clever. And there's something about the quote that I really love that I feel like when you're applying your art to somebody else, you don't want them to be thinking about another artist. You want them to be thinking about you. You're the artist, you're the authority on your work. So you can quote yourself and there it is. You don't need to bring in someone else. So someone else, another mentor of mine, told me that. He's like, you don't need Joan Didion in there. Like, do you want to be the next Joan Didion? Then get her out of there, even though I love her work. Oh, Anton, I'm just reading from the chat here. Shortening the childhood segment, interest, bringing the process themes to the top. That is such a good point. So shortening the childhood segment, that is a really interesting thing that I could leave in, maybe even just leave out of the statement and put more in my work because it's going to come out in that anyways. And the themes and process to the top. Love that. You guys don't need this class. And yes, I'm using the word themes, but there is no specific theme. A lot of these are disjointed. So excellent. All right, let's get rid of this slide. Horrible. Not horrible. It's all part of the process. So here is my edited statement. And I kept a lot of the same words, but I just cut out, I would say more than half. My identity is important, so I did keep where I'm coming from. I was more specific about exactly what type of writing. So I say writing, but I want to say my memoir or my manuscript, my screenplays, and my essays. Then my childhood, kind of in that second paragraph, it mines early experiences with teenage identity. And then where's the why? The instability of a household shaped by alcoholism. So there's a little bit of a why there. And if you see, even in that, so again, I'm just talking about the second sentence here, second paragraph, I'm kind of moving things along. So I'm saying, in particular, my screenplays and essays, they come from this part in the childhood. And then next, I'm throwing something down the line. Motherhood has now sharpened my sense of urgency. So there's a bit of movement in time here. without listing A, B, C, D, E, F, G since childhood. So there are ways to play with time without listing things, is what I'm trying to say. One thing that I had not put in at all, if you go back to the top paragraph, was adding in, and I didn't bold this, and I meant to, my music and pop culture elements, which I looked at my work. Almost everything I write has music involved. Almost everything I create has some reference to the 90s. I needed to put that in there, and I needed to put that at the top. And then finally, jumping back to the last paragraph, I wanted to have something that made a note about my voice. So even though I'm talking about these complex identity issues and alcoholism and motherhood, I want the reader to know that humor is really important in my work. It's part of my voice. This is almost acting like a teaser. Here is my way that I'm making this a little more unique. And then not only am I giving them a little bit of a tease, I'm saying it affirms these complicated identities that I am talking about at the very beginning. So it's a tease at the end, and then I'm also kind of wrapping things up from the beginning. So this whole statement feels like a nice, like tight ball of yarn instead of string all over the place. Any questions about this example? I have a couple of quotes here that I just love. And I saw demonizing or should go with your teenage identity. Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that. Yeah, so also anyone, if you, use the chat, I'll definitely be engaging with that. And we will also have questions at the end too, for anyone who joined a bit late. These are some tips or some quotes, that I really loved as I was putting this together. And I think for the first one, your friends might not be grant writers, but if they don't understand what you wrote, a panelist won't either. Going back to sharing it with family, all ages of people, people whose English isn't a first language. I think the more people that you share it with, the better. You never know the demographic of your panelists. And kind of like what I did in my example, don't just say you're exploring identity. Tell us the richness, the how, the why, and what it looks like in your physical work. And say what you mean, not what sounds impressive. Reviewers are looking for clarity and not cleverness. All right, we're moving into more of like the brass tacks of organization, which again is going to be hugely helpful for a bunch of reasons. And the most important one being, well, there's not one important one. One example of why staying organized is really nice is if you apply to a few grants one year and then you get the hang of it and you're doing a few more the next year, your name is going to start getting out there. You want to make sure that you keep track of where you're applying to. There are some rules where you can't apply to the same one in the same calendar year. So you might want to note that somewhere. So having one central location is my first key for organization. So where are you storing anything to do with these grants, including the artist statement, notes about the deadlines, which I'll get into in a second. Maybe you know somebody at an organization or someone referred you, or you know someone that works there. You might want to note that down somewhere too. You can handwrite to start or maybe while you're researching, but I would always kind of like write things down and put it back into my digital folder. So my situation is that I have a Google Drive and it's just the year and then grants and fellowships. And then when you click on those folders, there's statements, there's applications, and then there's an Excel tracker, which I'll show you an example of. All right. The research too is for these folders, you want to collect examples of artist statements. You can kind of put those in there too. Those might exist in a different folder or in links. And deadlines. I think without the right calendar or reminders of when to do things, you can miss an opportunity entirely. So as you start getting more applications under your belt, I sometimes start now with my calendar. I cast a wide net over the internet, or I research in magazines. I put in all the grants of the year that I'm interested in. I put them in a calendar, and then I work backwards from the deadline. A naming system is really important. So a date and organization name for each document will help you down the road if you want to go back and reflect or find things that you, let's say, for example, that you won a grant and you really want to use that artist statement again or that budget again because it worked. You want to be able to easily find that later. And feedback. A lot of organizations like the GCAC offers feedback from the judges. So even though it can sometimes sting and you're like, oh, I don't agree with this feedback, I find that over time it can be helpful. So keep a tracker if you can of all the passes, wins, and feedback. And again, there's no pressure to take everything literally and change things based on one judge because it might not be the right edit for you. But sometimes, if there's enough time elapsed, a week, a month, maybe a year, you can look back on some of the feedback and think, you know what? They did have a kernel of truth in that idea, and maybe I will apply that to my next piece of writing. All right. Any questions on those? I went through those a little fast and want to make sure that we're not getting too off track here. All right. This is a sample tracker that I have. And this is real. These are real things that I have applied to and lost, or I'm waiting to hear back. And this is how I organize the application part. So I always have the outlet name and I link to what it is, the deadline, which is really important, and when I submitted it. The when I submitted is really important because sometimes I like to follow up. If it's, for example, a literary journal or maybe a nonprofit arts organization that you know is maybe understaffed and they don't have an autoresponder, and you know the team is small, you can always kind of check in, keep those really brief and be like, hey, my name is Coco. I applied a month ago. Just wanted to see if there's anything that you needed. I had one example where my application had gone to trash or not trash to junk just because they were a startup and they didn't have like a submittable account. It was just an email. So it is good to check in on your application, depending on the outlet. Can we get a picture of the sample tracker? Yeah, everyone will get these slides. So can you see the example? Is it showing up on the screen right now? You can see like outlet name and then all the different colors like green, red, and yeah, okay. Yes, you'll get this. Um, great. Yeah, all of these slides will be sent. And you can also, I mean, this is just one way that I do it. You can Google examples. If you're familiar with Canva, canva.com, they are like a graphic design, really user friendly. They have examples in there of different Excel sheets you can use. There's lots and lots of resources out there if you Google or submission trackers. And something like that. And then after you start applying to a few, you'll kind of realize like what you really want to have in each of these columns and you can make it your own. But I find some helpful columns are definitely the outlet name or the organization name, the grant name, the fellowship name, yeah. The open period, so usually that's a window, and then of course the deadline. I always put in, so I put in the deadline and then in my calendar, I give myself 3 days before that deadline as a reminder that I have 3 days left before a certain deadline. So I have it covered on my tracker and then I have it in my iCal, which gives me a reminder on my phone, which has saved me a few times. Then the work submitted, I like to know which pieces that I'd submitted and status. And I just want to be completely upfront with you. I cut out maybe 30 red columns. So just know that rejection is so part of this game. It's going to happen a lot, but it'll make you stronger. And it makes the ones that you do win and get all the more special. And then it's not showing on this, but I have one more column to the right after status. That's just notes. And that's For example, like I said earlier, oh, I met this person through this event and I took a webinar with Coco McCracken on the GCAC and she recommended this. So it's nice to just have these little anecdotal places for your application. Hey, budget. So I have applied to many that have budgets that are very complicated and some are very simple. I would say that in general, and before I dive into my advice, always read the guidelines on the website of or the organization that you're applying with. Almost always there will be maybe a webinar to help you through it, a blog, and then most importantly, someone that you can contact to get this right, because you don't want something simple to put you back in your application, like it should be in this format, or make sure you have these columns involved. So it's hard to give exact advice on how to write a budget, especially because I work in Maine and we have a lot of different types of grants versus Ohio. Um, but yes, oh, would it be helpful to include revision notes? Yes, I can share that for sure. No problem. All right. So, so that being said, every budget is different. Here are kind of broad strokes, some helpful information on when you have to write the budget part. So get really clear, kind of like the statement on what you're doing. What is the timeline of this project? Are you creating a mural and it is going to take 1 month? I'm going to use that example through the rest of it. Okay, so if you're creating a mural for a piece of art or on a building and it's 1 month in June, because it can't be too hot, can't be too cold. What are the phases? So research, you need to figure out the art. You're going to have meetings with the owner of the building or the artist collective. Maybe there's going to be some back and forth on revisions of the piece that the mock-up that you're going to show. Then production, how long is it going to take to set up the scaffolding, get the paints, and maybe at the very end, is there going to be like an unveiling? Is it going to be photographed? Never forget, whether it's fine art or literary, how is it going to be documented after? You can always usually add those in your grant as well. You want to think from the whole spectrum of this project. What are the components that you would need to pay for? And don't cut yourself out of the picture either. The very first category is artist fees, pay yourself. Oh, and I forgot to say who's involved. So back to the mural example, if you are the principal artist, but you need, other people to be your assistant to help fill in the bigger parts, you're going to need to pay them as well. There are some little things too you want to remember too, like, do you have insurance? Does your insurance go up when you're on location? You can add a line in, excuse me, a line in for that as well. So the categories, artist fees, pay yourself first. You can do it hourly per day or a flat rate for the project. Just make sure you differentiate that in the budget line, or it will tell you how to. And then your materials and supplies, your equipment, the rental, any travel. If the building is an hour away and you have to travel every day for a month, you can work out how that might work. Or maybe you're staying there. Maybe you're flying in from a different state. Maybe you're coming to Maine and you're making a beautiful mural for us. Include the lodging and travel. And marketing and documentation, because I'm a photographer too, I feel so strongly about this. You want to make sure that you're not just capturing it for future grants, but maybe you're putting it on social media. You are putting on your website, you're sharing it with a PR agency in the future. You want to make sure that whatever you create is documented in some way. Installation tech support, if you're doing something more like film. And I always like to add at the very end, and this is usually totally allowed, contingency. So you can, depending on how things are written in their budget, having a 5 to 10% buffer for surprises is super important. It's kind of like a renovation or any kind of project. Things are usually more than you think. And okay, I've got a question from Tanisha. If you know that the project is costing more than the grant amount, yes, would you denote your entire budget for only what would be for the amount of grant. Yeah, so let's say, okay, an example for this, maybe I can show it in the next slide, but let me try to answer this as best as I can now. And if you need more clarity, let me know. So let's say I applied for a grant and it was $2,000, but I know it would actually take me 3,000 to do this project. You can, if you already know that that extra 1,000 is going to be pulled from an in-kind donation or you've saved up for it, you can leave a separate area to add that in. Be like, the full project is going to be this amount, but I have already planned ahead and raised $1,000 from the bank because that's the building, the mural I'm doing it on. And then as far as allocating where the budget goes, that's up to you. You can you can put the money wherever you want and whatever makes sense to you. As long as it's simple and things are accounted for, that's what the judges are looking for. Okay, this person has a really clear understanding of how much this project is going to cost. This is where most of it is going to go. Oh, they need a little more, but they're going to get it from A, B, or C. So let me know if that made sense. And I'll show on the next screen too an example. Okay, so like I said, keep it clear, simple. So this is a real example of yeah, actually there's two examples on this page and I realized, yeah. So talking first about this side. So one budget that I won had only 5 lines. It had my per diem, which included the cost of me missing work for a week, which you can put that in. Lovely. So I paid myself and I missed work for a week. So I put both of those in. Again, it depends on who your organization is, but they were like, yes, we want to pay you. So add in what you are going to lose if you can't go into work each day. Also childcare. I have 2 little kids, which makes creating art almost impossible, but some grants give you a line for childcare, which is just so meaningful and lovely. And then I put my gear and materials in and my travel, which I think this particular budget, it was for a residency and it was 2 hours away. So not only did I put in all the food and beverages that I was gonna consume that weekend, I also included gas and mileage and even coffees on the way. It's all part of the package. The one on the right is kind of what we were talking about with that last question. So let's just say this is your $2,000 for your time and you have $1,000 in materials and you have to rent something, a piece of equipment for 500, so on and so forth. It all comes to, 47.50. Now, you know that you're also going to get some extra support. Let's say there's some wood that you need for a sculpture. A local lumber, again, Maine, I don't know, a local lumberjack, and they're going to give you $200 worth of their wood. You can say donated wood there. And that is all under, it's called in-kind support. And then there was a time where I had my studio space where I can't work from home. Usually I've got 2 kids, so it's just too loud. I needed a studio space. So for 3 months, they valued that at $1,200 and a local person gave me their studio for 3 months. And then at the very end, this is, or the last example of the in-kind support I have on this slide is kind of a fun thing that I offer as a photographer is I paid them out of my budget $500 because you want to pay artists too and get the cash flow going. But, I can't afford their $1,000 a day rate. So they said, I will pay me $500 and then 500 of that I will volunteer those hours to you. That's kind of a nice way to barter, but still get paid and pay artists because I believe everything that you put out in the world comes back to you. So that's one way that you can kind of split the difference on your expenses and getting donations, aka in-kind support. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything important here. So just the note, the differentiate between income and expenses. Again, coming back to the person who reads it wants to see just a very simple, balanced budget. And finally, transparency helps. So instead of thinking, oh, I think this photographer is going to cost $12,000, maybe double check with them and their closer to $8,000. Those aren't real numbers, but get a real quote where you can, and you can. They don't have to be specific to decimal points. Round numbers are fine, but you just want to be prepared to explain them. And then, of course, if you get the grant, you are going to have to hire those people. So you want to make sure that you're on track there. Any other questions about the budget? There's so much. I feel like the budget can be confusing, but again, practicing, Googling online, getting more examples are great. Asking people in your family that are a little better at math can just help you with that. And of course, you can always contact, in particular, the GCAC. I have their email up here if you don't, to ask them about specific budget questions. Okay, so we are getting towards the end here. I want to just give these links to you all. I think most of you will have these. These are all the GCAC related ones. So I assume that I shouldn't assume. I know a lot of you are already familiar, but I put the calendar at the very top because I really do believe in the idea of working backwards from the deadline. Keeps you organized and keeps you kind of gives you more breathing room with these applications, which will in turn kind of give you a little more time and promote like a better quality artist statement. So it all trickles down to this holistic way of looking at it. So look through the GCAC calendar, see what is coming up. This is just the breakdown between their funding for artists. So there's artist fundings, which is the smaller projects. I think it's like $1,200 for the artist funding. And then there's artist projects. There's a little more money there. In the slides that you get, these will all be linked that you can click on. And then, of course, they have lots of resources too. I was even just looking on their Instagram. I realized they post these, like today, the workshops, webinars, there's some wellness things in person and online. So definitely try to make space for that. Even I was thinking about earlier how I was saying you make time for researching other people's artist statements, make time to take workshops to get involved with your community. And you never know who you might meet that might recommend a grant and it leads to something else. It's some things you can't plan for. And I find that getting involved is the best way to get opportunities. These are some different resources that I really use. Hyperallergic is a really popular art outlet, kind of journalism, and they have a great monthly newsletter that they just have the, April 2025 opportunities for artists. And it covers a wide range of disciplines. And they have really, really great opportunities there that change, like I said, every month. Poets and writers, if you're in the literary arts, and the NEA is the National Endowment for the Arts. They always have a lot there too. Creative Capital is another one. One that I didn't write in here, and I will add here, is Headlands. Headland Center for the Arts. There's another thing, another organization you can look up to. I think pooling your resources with your friends and peers and colleagues, going on Reddit, if you're a Reddit fan, depending how you feel about AI and ChatGPT, you could ask ChatGPT funny questions about that. Essentially, if you just search artist grants plus your state or your town or region, hopefully there'll be lots to choose from. Not enough, but enough to choose from. All right. So I just want to end with this. I just finished the book, Atomic Habits, which is a self-help book that just came out by James Clear. And it's more about habits and breaking bad habits. But I found that in every page, it kind of related to my life as an artist. And I think I had this image in my head of creating art or writing books. I would be holed up in this cabin and writing these manuscripts on typewriters and really diving into that image of the artist, which I do love to do. And I think sometimes I will be able to experience that. But most of what being an artist is, especially if you need the money to make your art, like I do, you need a really good system in place to help you achieve those goals. And I think it's not just the goal, because what does a goal mean? Does it mean you want to get a grant? That's great. But do you want to get more than one grant? Probably. So instead of reinventing the wheel each time to that goal, if you have a system, that's going to set you up for ease as you go forward. So it's the idea, the second quote here, goals are good for setting a direction, but a system is best for making progress. And hopefully this slideshow will help you integrate a system into your artistic practice. So when you go to sit down to apply for these grants, you have everything at your fingertips ready. And that means when you go to the woods or your studio or the podcast production, audio production room, you're just ready to focus on your art and you're ready to show up for yourself in the best way that you can there. So that's all I have for you today. I think we just hit an hour, almost an hour. So we have a bit of time if you have any questions. Happy to look in the chat, or you can flip your camera on if you're feeling like that. Or of course, you can always contact the GCAC and get my information there. If there's something in particular related to this project or this presentation you wanted more clarity on. But I'm just really thrilled to have been here today and chatting with you all. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, so Leslie is asking that I focused in the GCAC requests a resume. Do you mind talking the difference between the two? Yeah. So a resume or a curriculum vitae, if you're Latin fluent, sorry if I mispronounced that, CV and a resume. Okay, so there are a little different lines of thought on this. For the most part, they are the same thing. Resume has usually been used in kind of more workplace situations. So where have you worked? Where did you go to school? An artist's CV is more in depth where you might cover exhibitions, publications. Some CVs, I even see a very tiny, tiny artist statement at the very top. So as far as the GCAC, I wonder if they mean the same thing. And we can ask, I can find out for you what that would be and get back to you. But I'm pretty sure that if for an artist grant, they would want something like a CV. So if you're practicing, if you're a painter and you have exhibited in some places, you would want to have a section on exhibitions. If you're a writer and you have some publications, you would want to put that in there, versus work-related things to your art. Does that answer your question, Leslie? Oh, and Ariel is in the house and he might be able to answer. I think he's typing. Help me out here. Okay, so Ariel's saying that for the most part, it depends on the grant, but for the GCAC, it's good practice to submit both. That's great. So there's an opportunity to do both. And again, this is something that you can look for on Google, just double check the differences, maybe look at some examples of what a CV, an artist CV is versus a resume. That's a really good question though. Highlights instead of. Okay. Oh, this is so good. I'm scared of applying for certain grants because my background of art, visual graffiti, is kind of overlooked because of Ohio laws. Any advice for me? Oh, this is tough because like I don't want to give any legal advice, being from Maine or just in general. But I would say, in general, okay, I have a general thought and then maybe a more specific one. So the idea of applying for a grant based on like what you're doing and it feeling like it's not very like common, there's not really much to compare it to out there, is a really good thing. It means that you're doing something that is very different and exciting And you want to make sure that you're not changing anything in your application to suit what you think the person might want. Um, as far as like the actual application of the graffiti, you want to make sure that anything that you put in the application or in your portfolio isn't like inappropriate or illegal. I believe you would maybe just want to like double check that before submitting it. And maybe we can ask to the just the question of you can email and ask beforehand if you want, if you have a specific question about, oh, I feel like the application's great, but there's just this one piece that I'm not sure of because of a law might get involved. Um, I'm curious what the Ohio laws are, though. Ariel, do you have anything to add to that last question? Um,
About the graffiti?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not totally familiar with the Ohio laws, other than I know that it's illegal.
Okay.
But I know there are a lot of artists that are like, for example, there's a supply store out here that they have a whole property where a lot of graffiti artists that also tag around the city, they kind of have a little outlet there that they do it legally, and a lot of them apply for grants using those walls. So I know there are some places where you know, you can talk with a business owner and they'll let you do it legally, and then you can use
Mhm.
that to, you know, to show if it's or to add to your portfolio or to your grant or to your application. A lot of times, you know, it's I can't say that people are looking to see if you painted something legally, um, but it's still good practice to just be like, you know, to find a place where you could do it in unison with somebody that, you know, you can have a place and say, you know, we did this as a collaboration or something like that.
Mhm,
On the
mhm.
other hand, there are a lot of artists that will um they either do prints of their pieces and put them in galleries and then use that as a way to apply for the grant, or they'll do the same style but on a canvas and then do gallery shows and then use that for their grants, for their applications. So there's a few different I think a few different approaches you can take and still keep the integrity of your practice.
Yep. That's really great advice there for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll see if I can think of some artists that I follow online that I know they are graffiti artists, but they're also muralists and gallery artists,
Mhm.
but they use the same style, you know,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
throughout.
Um, there's a really famous, I think they're famous. They're wonderful in Maine. Um, they're muralists and artists, graffiti artists, and I can pop them into the chat too. Um, yeah, even just like getting involved or looking at other people's portfolios is always a nice way to um, reflect, benchmark your own.
Yeah,
Thank you.
super good question though.
Great questions. Yeah, any others? Well, like I said, you can always reach out to the GCAC if you have more, and especially if you rewatch this later and you want a little more explanation on anything in particular. We're here for you, and organizations like the GCAC are too. And good luck, everyone. I'm just really excited for you all to put this into practice and get that money.
Yes.
All right. Have a
Thank
lovely
you,
day. Have a
Coco.
lovely, yeah, thank you for having me. All right.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye,
guys. We'll make
everybody.
sure everybody gets the info.
Yeah.
All right, bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.